Summer was a weird season, because on my first impression, you can check that out in the card on screen, it had a lot of potential, but the first outings didn't really impress me a ton. Well, now that it's all said and done, what did we end up with? My thoughts haven't really changed that much, and that means we're breaking these shows down by what I thought was good, watchable, and downright bad. So let's get on into that after a quick subscribe checkpoint to remind you to do so. All done? Alright. The good shows this season were pretty obvious in hindsight, because there was such a clear line in terms of animation, direction, and storytelling that made them stand head and shoulders above the rest. And best of all, there were a ton of genres, so it didn't really feel stale either. Let's look at them in more detail. HoriMiya Peace was a shoo-in for this spot because it's just more of a great romance story. The first series was a fairly complete package as far as viewing experiences go, but just getting more of the characters we love and their internal struggles, and taking a small step back to view the core of Hori and Miya's relationship from a different light really brought the emotions back to the surface for me. To cap that off is still a very abstract presentation that gets the viewers into the characters' heads. It very much feels like you're in the moment with this anime, and it's a refreshing experience. There is a drawback, however, and it's that this doesn't really stand on its own as a work. If you're watching this without first seeing HoriMiya, it'll feel scattershot and confusing. So just like with recommending a season 2, despite this not being a traditional sort of one, you'll need to watch the first series to appreciate the beauty here. And that's not really asking a whole lot, because it's one of the best romance series out to date. Oh boy. Mushoku Tensei had a slow burn for a start. Controversy aside, I still enjoyed this season. I may need to clarify why, but it really boils down to Rudeus isn't a good person. And here's the thing, he doesn't really try to be good either. While his last life was awful, his real aims are to live life unburdened by his previous experiences and find a bit of happiness for himself. Mushoku Tensei has been talked up as an isekai done right, but part of that is it's really not trying to be an isekai. Seeing the characters outright disavow the light novel tropes of reinventing the world in their image sort of hints that this isn't really about being a hero, but more about not holding yourself back. And in practice, that means an emotionally stunted man-child making mistakes and realizing his actions have consequences. And I think that's why this season had a tone shift, as it went from a naive boy on an adventure to the crushing reality that he'll be living with his mistakes. And for me, that was a welcome shift, because it shows a desire to tell a story instead of moral grandstanding or superficial heroism. I wouldn't say Mushoku Tensei is dark, but it's unapologetic in just how raw the story can be, and that weight isn't really for everyone. But this season specifically really made me look at Rudeus as a person, and try to engage with his mental struggles, more so than any other isekai protagonist has managed. Another surprise to absolutely no one, Bleach's new core still carved out a spot. Picking up where the last core left off, we had a ton of crazy fights and hype moments that are really what made this arc so anticipated in the manga. But the anime is in a pretty lucky spot of having a lot of hindsight it can use to improve the story. They're actually using it to clarify some of the points in the manga and make an overall more cohesive package. But that doesn't mean cuts weren't still made. Not that those negatively impacted the product we got. Ultimately, it packs amazing animation, really good fight scenes, top-tier choreography, and just about everything the fanbase was hoping for. I just hope that as the arc goes on, they're able to keep dressing up some of the shortcomings a rushed finale had. Zom 100 had an unfortunate production plagued with delays, but the episodes we got were fantastic. The series packs style, comedy, and horror into a neat package that had me hooked. There's times the pace is more slice of life and goofy, but then the harsh reality that these characters are living in a zombie apocalypse hits, which throws in some much needed tension. And I think what elevated this series is the fact it doesn't take itself too seriously, and embodies its message of living life to the fullest. The cast are all likable, and looking for some way to reclaim their lost life in modern society, using the recent doomsday as a way to reset their own situation. It's quirky, fun, and thrilling due to just how unexpected and dangerous things are. That was all punctuated with a solid art style that dressed up the abject horror of a zombie apocalypse with fun colors, bombastic animation, and a lively performance that brought this sense of liberation to life. This was a series packed with personality, and when it does finally finish airing, it's got a solid recommendation, because the delays were honestly my biggest issue with this anime. My Happy Marriage was a surprise, honestly. What could have been a fairly mundane execution turned into a genuinely engaging experience with solid animation, likable unlikable characters, and a supernatural twist that adds to the story. The first episode is a bit heavy-handed in beating you over the head with just how abused the main girl is, but it definitely gets you into her headspace. She struggles with her emotional abuse and trauma over the course of this series, learning what love and family are like. It creates a very human struggle of the two leads learning to be a couple in an era where happy marriages and love weren't exactly a common thing. I don't think it has a ton that's unique in terms of what it offers, but the execution of the elements it does offer are leagues above most others on the market. If you like romance and twists on Cinderella-esque stories, this is well worth your time. As for the animation, it's given the time and care this series deserves, creating a visually engaging and artistically told experience, using color, animation, and cinematography to elevate this and convey the moods of the cast, which is essential for this sort of story, where so much of the drama is about how the characters feel. For a series that could have been generic and faded into the background, I was blown away by how well executed this turned out to be. Undead Girl Murder Farce had a somewhat rough start, but the quirkiness actually carried this one through. The first episode promised a lot in terms of animation and intrigue, but the subsequent first arc of the series fell a bit flat in terms of execution. I think this series requires a very specific set of interests on the part of the audience to enjoy it, and if you just so happen to have those, it'll probably be a top tier show. So what did we actually get? An MCU-style crossover of various public domain literary characters and monsters, solving mysteries in a stereotypical Sherlock Holmes sort of way, while allowing for interjections, non-sequiturs, and Rakugo-style performances, punctuated by fights between monsters to sell a mishmash of themes. The series is part mystery, part comedy, and a lot of misdirection, using that to catch the audience up on the plot that's usually already played out by that point, and that's not exactly a bad approach, since it's primarily meant to make you laugh, without explicitly making jokes, hence the whole farce in the title. If that sounds interesting, it's a solid execution on that premise and will be pretty entertaining, but for those of you who think it sounds like a mess, it'll probably appear as such. Holding that together is a solid animation style that's not overly ambitious, but leans hard into selling the mystery, and honestly looks quite nice. Ultimately, I found this one enjoyable, because I like that sort of juggling comedy and plot with things clicking into place at the last second as though it all went according to plan. So yeah, check it out. Well, I have to say, Helck is probably one of my most controversial picks up here. Going into this, and based off the description, you might assume it's a fairly tense action series. But it's not. It's a comedy. The jokes did feel a bit samey, but lend to an atmosphere where the cast is relatable and approachable despite their power and status. Mystery becomes a pretty prevalent theme too, as who Helck is, what are his motives, and what happened to humanity become questions spurring you down the rabbit hole of this anime. I think it does a solid job at building intrigue without shoving it down your throat. I think the humor works on top of being a nice hook for the series as it keeps some of the darker themes in check. But really, I just found this to be a solid mix of relaxing and engaging that I wanted to come back each week, knowing full well that a solid chunk of this runtime will be devoted to slapstick-style humor. The animation is definitely the weakest part, and honestly the worst of the lineup of good shows this season, but that actually speaks to the quality of the story itself. Helck made for an entertaining watch this season, and definitely earned its place up here. Well, we made it through the good shows, so let's talk about the middle of the road ones. These are anime that have one or two things holding them back from greatness, but still have an audience that would be worth giving a recommendation to. So understand, each of these has a conditional statement. Let's get on into it. I actually wanted to hate The Dreaming Boy as a realist more than I did. This one is all sorts of messed up, given a fresh coat of whitewashing as long as you don't think about the implications. The main guy is an obsessive stalker who isolated his crush to the point that most people don't want anything to do with her because of him. And the only reason he stopped is because he realized that's pretty gross. Yeah, that's played off for laughs, by the way. But then it goes the whole she's actually developing feelings for him now that he's not harassing her on a daily basis, with a worrying amount of gaslighting and Stockholm Syndrome. Wait, why am I recommending this? Well, probably because if you look past all that, the story is about a guy who's entirely unremarkable, realizing that fact, and attempting to fix his past mistakes. Now that doesn't exactly excuse them all, but it makes it a lot more tolerable, because you recognize the problems before committing too hard. So what plays out is a redemption arc slice of life series with romantic tensions, as the two start building a relationship from square one. Though to be fair, it introduced a lot of baggage that's an immediate turnoff for a lot of people. And I can't say the final product is worth struggling through if that's your hangup. For fans of slow burn romance series who are so terminally into anime that this seems like a normal setup, you'll probably enjoy it. Everyone else, it's not offensive, but it's also not impressive enough to stand out. On the opposite side of that spectrum, a girl I like forgot her glasses. This is a solid slice-of-life rom-com that's easily recommendable to fans of the genre. The oblivious girl coming to the realization that her classmate is actually someone special to her is an adorable thread to watch play out. While the comedy didn't exactly have me in stitches, it still made me chuckle. It helps that it relates to the whole reason these two end up in each other's orbit in the first place. She forgets her glasses, has poor eyesight, and the dude covering for her ends up either troubled or flustered, damn near having a heart attack sometimes because she puts herself in awkward situations or ends up getting so close as nosebleeds. It's rare for an anime to capture that awkward adolescence aspect so many franchises fail to do, probably because these kids in middle school are actually written as middle school kids experiencing their first crush. They're growing up and trying to rectify what they're feeling with past experience and cultural stereotypes, leading to both cute and funny moments. This is surprisingly relaxing and sweet for any rom-com fans out there looking for a new series. And while Gohan's animation always strikes me as awkward, it's used to somewhat good effect here, by highlighting what these two like about one another. Reborn as a vending machine was a very strange sort of isekai. The issue was its premise was interesting, the ideas were strong, but the execution of those ideas was lacking. In an isekai setting, most people want to learn more about the world and fantasy elements. This series instead took a more slice-of-life approach, while barely registering most of the world building as things of interest. The guy being an immobile vending machine with a few stock phrases as his only means of communication, whose only real OP power is a barrier that he had to learn to use in a creative way, sets this up for a lot of problem solving and a unique spin on the isekai genre. But instead we get a chain restaurant coming to town and a magic tool showcase, and him occasionally going out of town as a supply chain to adventuring groups. Now, none of that is necessarily bad, but it does feel like a waste of potential when the series brings up the ethics of sticking a human soul in an inanimate object. Is it worth a watch? Probably for fans of quirky sort of fantasy anime, or maybe even people who like off-the-wall slice of life. But I can guess that fans of standard isekai will quickly drop it for lacking the fights and power fantasy they're so used to. Wow, I can already see the flood of comments by sticking Jujutsu Kaisen way down here. Let me explain. This season was hit with some rough patches that really held it back. The first season had a lot of emotional heart and built intrigue early on to get the audience hooked. That mixed with stellar animation made it an easy standout pick. But then season 2 starts off with a slower paced arc that probably would have been better suited for a movie or TV special. Then it took a few weeks break before coming back with another few slower paced episodes, all before finally getting into the next real arc of the story. Yeah, it's entirely a pacing issue that bogged this down on a week-to-week viewing basis. And I understand that won't be an issue when rewatching it, but after this many episodes aired in the first season, there was a lot more excitement going on, and ultimately I'm going off my experience watching what's presented. Will this arc shape up into a memorable addition? No doubt, as there's some strong emotional punches coming, but at the halfway point of its 24-episode season, it's feeling a bit light in comparison to other entries, as well as its own first season. The Masterful Cat is depressed again today is about where I thought it would end up from my preview. A surreal slice-of-life anime about a massive human-sized cat taking care of a slob while sidestepping the whole "how is this even possible" angle gives a nice mismatch in expectations and reality. And the humor was honestly a cut above what I would expect from this sort of show. It could have easily relied on a single joke. But there's a surprising amount of character in the two leads that make this an enjoyable experience. So why the hell is it down here then? Sounds like I liked it, right? Honestly, the answer is, at the heart of it, this anime is just a fairly standard slice of life relying on a gimmick to carry it forward, and it really doesn't pack a ton of laughs or have any standout moments. I find myself asking, will the audience remember this show because of their experience watching, or because they just remember the giant cat? And the answer is pretty clear. The human cast fades to the background, and the giant cat stands out. While I enjoyed it and would easily recommend it to slice of life and comedy fans looking for something different, it lacks wider appeal and intrigue to hold on to an audience long term. I would have liked to have said that Liar Liar was either going to be great or garbage, but we all knew it would end up as a middle-of-the-road anime, borrowing a ton of plot elements from various other franchises and mashing it together to create a weird game economy sort of deal centered around high schoolers and cheating. Sounds like an interesting premise, but the execution here is lacking, flocking immediately to a game of the week sort of deal with no real motive or goals to move the plot forward, besides two people are missing and this guy just needs to play games to not be found out as a fraud. those aren't necessarily linked, and the games don't come down to skill since the guy is using a super hacker to rig the games in his favor. But then there's glimpses that he's really good at reading people and working situations to his favor. So really it's just a muddled mess where the show wants to have its cake and eat it too. They want the super genius, without him being a super genius all the time. Can't make up its mind. There's nothing overtly bad about it, but the pacing is glacial, and it comes down to whether you enjoy light suspense anime with a decent amount of fan service. If not, it's fairly easily skipped. If Zom 100 was mostly comedy with a dose of horror, Dark Gathering is mostly horror with a dose of comedy. This anime screamed nostalgia to me despite its modern release date, by delving into urban legends and ghost stories with a 90s anime aesthetic. And I love that aspect about it. The horror scenes were tense, the comedy breaks up the pace, and it even has some fairly disturbing themes. So why is it down here then? That's a bit complicated, but I think it fails to capitalize on the hype. There's a false sense of progression as the cast take on new urban legends each week, feeling like it would fit comfortably into a long-running anime market, but also continues to hint that things are moving while no progress is actually made. The characters don't really grow, and honestly, they're not that likable in the first place. So really it leaves you hanging around with a yandere type, stoic creepy kid, and a crybaby that always ends up on the receiving end of the supernatural threats. Yeah, it's formulaic. It doesn't really capitalize on the intriguing plot of Yayoi's mother and the curse binding Eiko and Keitaro, which is a shame, because I like the potential this had as both a nostalgic vibe anime without pandering and a horror series. Not everything can be a winner. Some things were just flat out bad to the point I dropped them, or just can't see an audience worth recommending them to. These are the series that lacked in story, animation, or appeal, and usually more than one. So let's talk about them. Atelier Ryza probably doesn't deserve this spot, but it fell down to this tier because other shows were just more enjoyable and unique. A fairly competent looking fantasy series that follows a group of friends as they start adventuring, but can't really be bothered to have them go do all that stuff. Ever want to watch an extended training arc? Me either. I'm sure fans of the game series are enjoying this anime, but I was left with a sense of frustration as I skimmed episodes waiting for something interesting to actually happen, rather than characters just chatting about inconsequential things. Video game adaptations often fail because they either try to adapt the whole story and fail to distill it down to the new format, or refuse to commit enough to adapting the story period, leaving it incomplete. Here we got a series that wanted to cover as much of the video game in detail as possible, without really understanding what makes audiences stick around. I only made it about 4 or 5 episodes before I realized I had better things to do. So yeah, that was a long-winded way of saying it's boring. I'm absolutely not surprised Ayaka landed here, because this anime was just a hot mess. The issues I had in the first episode were as endemic as I predicted. So we got a hollow series that was too interested in flashy character designs than actually telling a story that wasn't using anime tropes as shorthand. I made it about 3 episodes in when I couldn't really be bothered to watch anymore because the anime just didn't carry my interest. There was so much to explore and get the audience hooked, but they just didn't. The spirits, weird sorcery, why these islands are special, hell, why this kid is special, none of that. Who cares? Just look at this badass dude with a gun. I feel like original anime always have so much potential and zero ability to actually capitalize. I think that's why most as of late have fallen into this camp. The same happened with Shinobi no Itoki and Magical Destroyers. Strong ideas and no execution or plot to speak of, which means it's just a waste of time to watch because it doesn't really go anywhere. Definitely skip, because other anime do everything this one did, but better. Yeah, zero regrets sticking My Tiny Senpai down here. This anime falls flat on its face because it's a horny slice-of-life comedy that's too prude to really embrace itself. Instead, it hyper-fixates on cute to the point I got a concussion from being beaten over the head with how often I heard the word kawaii. The entire premise is the plot, and summed up as what if a petite woman with big boobs had a crush on you super hard at work? Is there a relationship to get behind? Maybe. But the main dude has zero personality, so the coworker doesn't get outshined in any scenes because hers is shallow as fuck. On top of the fact it would just ruin the whole self-insert aspect, which makes this feel extra dirty. Here's the thing. This isn't offensive, but insulting. The fact that other anime do the whole tiny senpai at work shtick better, and I'm just gonna sidestep that's become a genre at this point, but also manage to actually have comedy and personality for its cast, you can get as much enjoyment out of this anime looking at a single still as watching all 12 episodes. And I think that speaks volumes. Okay, why was MI actually the strongest so goddamn bad? I'm actually baffled here. I didn't think it was possible for isekai to get much worse, but then this strolled onto the scene and said hold my beer. Generic hand-wavy reincarnation for no reason, not even turned into a joke, but just because. And of course he's actually OP the whole time. And his power of choice to abuse? Barriers, of course. I actually lost my shit at this anime when this dude used barrier magic to create a sentient clone of himself, established an internet connection to modern day Japan so he could show his younger sister anime, and parade around in a Code Geass ripoff costume to save the day. So yeah, that all sounds like a comedy, but the dude gets weirdly emotionally invested at the drop of a hat for crap he'd normally shrug off. And the fact this guy's entire life goal is to become a need again in this world really saps any likability from the protagonist. And I didn't even touch on the fact the animation took a nosedive after a single episode, because I swear I've seen better stuff in a 1960s Hanna-Barbera cartoon. Lacking plot, unlikable characters, frustratingly stupid elements, obnoxious fan service, and horrible animation made a series that wasn't so bad it was good, it was just flat out bad. So that's it. We've wrapped up summer 2023, and while it may have ended on a bit of an abysmal note, let's not forget how many anime stood out this season with strong showings. Horror, action, comedy, and romances all made solid appearances, with actual animation and direction shining through this season. Wow, it's almost like anime actually had animation. That honestly made it all worthwhile. But tell me your thoughts down below. I'd love to hear them. For now though, hey, you've made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and do all the other YouTube stuff to help the channel grow. You can also join my Discord with a link down in the description. If you really want to support me, you can head on over to my Patreon and pick up some extra perks, like voting on what I'm watching next season. And speaking of Patreon, I'd like to give a special thanks to HonorWolf01, JMonth33A, Robin DBL, and Samuel Chen for their continued support. Thanks for watching.